like to welcome everybody to the Burnley, Pendle and Padiham British National Party meeting. We're very lucky this evening. We've got a star speaker, the chairman of the British National Party, Mr. Griffin MEP, who is here to answer questions on various issues of the day. So could we please have a good hand for Mr. Griffin MEP.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you all. Here to take questions tonight. It's important with this that you don't try not to give me the answer that you want to hear, because the whole point about these sessions is to show people, especially the newcomers here, that the British National Party stands for the things that they believe themselves, which is invariably, you'll find, the case. But if you tell me what answer you're expecting, and I give you the answer, people are thinking, well, perhaps he only said that because he or she wanted to hear that. So try and keep it just to the question and leave it to me to give the answer, and hopefully at the end we'll find we all agree. But if not, we're a democratic party, that's one of those things. So we're fairly pushed for time. It's got to get on to speak later tonight in Salford. So let's fire away. First question, please.
Nick, shortly we're going to get the Bulgarian and Romanian invasion because these two countries have been allowed into the EU. What do you think about them being allowed over in such huge numbers? Will it put a strain on our system, our resources and so on, the infrastructure?
Yeah, obviously it's all in the news at present that when Poland and the other Eastern European countries joined the EU, Britain didn't sign the piece of paper which would keep their nationals out for 5 years, with the result that I think it was the 13,000 Poles that the British government, the Labour government expected, turned into 600,000 and had a catastrophic effect, especially on the wages of ordinary British people. So more recently, Bulgaria and Romania joined, and there was this get-out clause signed, and it's now time's up. So in January the 1st this coming year, you are right, we're going to see a flood of immigrants from those two countries. Migration Watch's estimate is 70,000 a year for 5 years. That could easily be an underestimate. The Tory condemned government are simply refusing to tell us because they think it would frighten us. So it's going to be something quite major. It is going to have a huge impact on Britain, and there's two very different groups going to come. First of all, the sheer biggest numbers are going to be their Roma Gypsy population, who live in poverty over there. They've got a truly shocking crime rate. They're alienated from their own national communities. They're going to come over here, and they're going to come here to sponge on a huge, huge scale. Hundreds of thousands at the very least, in a very short space of time. That's going to place an enormous burden, primarily on the unfortunate taxpayer. And obviously also a big, big burden on housing and health. It's going to cost us a fortune. The other group who are going to come over is going to affect perhaps a section of the British population who haven't had that much impact from immigration before, because those countries have got a lot of highly trained people. I was talking to the leader of the National Democratic Party of Bulgaria a week or so ago. He's a colleague of mine, one of our Nationalist Alliance members, Dimitar Stoyanov, and he was telling me that a friend of his is a consultant in the best hospital in Sofia in Bulgaria, and that this man said to him that he's now having to cancel operations frequently because 3 out of his 4 anaesthetists are now working in London. Now, you've got doctors, nurses, architects, all sorts, engineers, all sorts of people quite high up, very, very well trained, who are working over there for a pittance, and they are also going to be coming to work in Britain. It's going to mean that sections of Britain's middle class, people who up until now have tended to avoid the impact of immigration, they're going to get hit in the neck from this. So it's going to be an immense strain on our resources. It's also going to be a big strain on ordinary people in decent jobs who are going to find themselves in competition with cheap labour for perhaps the very first time. It's extraordinarily unfair on our people. It's also, if you think about it, very unfair on Bulgaria and Romania. They're going to suffer this brain drain of some of their best people they spend a lot of money training are going to be over here. It's going to hurt those countries, and it's going to hurt Britain as well. If we had a proper patriotic, genuine British government They simply say they're not going to allow those people to come to this country because it's bad for us, bad for our workers, bad for our taxpayers, and it's bad for those countries as well. We should simply shut the door. It's not going to happen. The only way in which Cameron may be pushed to do something effective is if they see the threat of this is creating extra British National Party votes in May. If we do well, then they will do something to keep some of those people out. If they feel they can get away with it, Cameron's in India this week saying every single Indian student who wants to come to Britain to study, and huge numbers of Indians who want to come and work in Britain, they can come as well. The Tory party is a party that's fundamentally in favour of mass immigration, and it's only pressure from people joining and voting for the British National Party which will make them think again. That's the only hope. Okay, next question please.
I'd just like to ask, what's the party's stance on gay marriage?
British National Party believes some of the most important things in this country are the children of this country. And the institution of marriage was created, and almost every society in human history has had it and has it. The institution of marriage is created as a way of adding an additional binding to tie together one man and one woman to have children. And it's because marriage is the best institution in which to bring up children. And if people aren't married, very often they bring up their kids, fine, no problem at all. But statistically and on average, children whose parents are married do better in school, they do better at work later on in their lives, they have a lower crime rate. Every possible indicator of the welfare of children indicates that having married heterosexual parents is the best possible start in life for kids. And what's going on with gay marriage, we've got gay members in the party. Our rule is, we don't really want to know about it, don't flaunt it in people's faces, but the way you happen to be born, the way you are, no one should be persecuted for that, it's just the way you are, just leave it be. But people like that, and lots of gay people in Britain, they don't want gay marriage. They recognise that that's something that's for heterosexuals, they don't want it. And it's being pushed by a militant, hardcore gay lobby, and by the left, heterosexual left, as a way of attacking marriage and traditional values and Christianity. And that's what we resist when we say, because of that, and because it's about the rights of children, we're absolutely 100% opposed to gay marriage.
Absolutely.
Okay, next question.
Nick, what are your thoughts about the taking down of the Union flag on City Hall, Belfast?
There's been a long-running campaign, a war against the British people of Northern Ireland by the IRA and their fellow travellers, their sympathisers, which includes the BBC. And this is just another part of this war. The IRA have given up bombing people, but they're still waging a war against the British population in Northern Ireland with their traditional Ulster British identity. And the taking down of the flag is another step in that war. And people on the mainland might think, well, perhaps, isn't it a bit excessive to go, rioting in the streets over a question of if they cease allowing you to fly your flag all the time? But it's the symbolic attack on the Unionists, the British population of Northern Ireland, and the symbolism has kicked it off. But it's also a reason that it's so upset people, and rightly so, is that it's not the only attack on British identity in Ulster. And every single day in the small streets of different parts of West and North Belfast, loyalist families, people whose ancestors fought and very often died for this country in a way that no other part of the United Kingdom did. Those people are being harassed, they're having their homes daubed, their cars scratched, their windows broken by Republican thugs who simply want to force them out of their areas. It's ethnic cleansing on a scale and in a way that actually people of parts of Burnley and people of parts of Colne and so on, and parts of other towns in the northwest of England are very familiar with. And here it's done, as you know, by young thugs from the Muslim population, and over there it's done by young Republicans, and it's the same thing. And we stand absolutely with the loyalists of Northern Ireland when they say that they want to carry on flying their flag, our flag, and if anyone doesn't like seeing our flag flying in our country, there's plenty of other countries they can go to.
Absolutely.
Okay, and another question.
This is another question about the EU. Do you think Britain gets a fair share of the budget that we contribute? And is the money accounted for?
Very interesting question, or two questions there really. Do we get our fair share of the budget? The answer is no. The simple figures are that we pay a huge amount of money in every year and we get a little bit out, a small change, and the difference is that it costs Britain, roughly speaking, £50 million a day for the privilege of being ruled by unelected French bureaucrats and German bankers. That's the reality of it. Losing 50 million quid a day is a bad deal, especially when it's paid for you to be ruled by foreigners who now make 80% of our laws. As a matter of fact, even if we gained financially from being in the EU, the British National Party would still oppose it, because what price can you put on freedom and independence? At the start of the First World War, the start of the Second World War, people didn't say, well, let's have a cost-benefits analysis of this. Would we actually be better off if the Germans invaded us? The answer is no, because the whole point about British freedom and British democracy is that we rule ourselves. And even if the politicians we have ruling us are corrupt and crooked, we've got at least a chance to kick them out, and they're ours ruling us from our own country. So we're completely opposed to being ruled by the EU, and as I say, it costs us at least £50 million a day to be ruled. On top of that, you add on the hidden costs of all the red tape and all the rest of it, and it costs Britain vast sums of money, so we're quite opposed to it. As opposed to as concerned whether that money is properly accounted for, again, the answer is absolutely not. The EU's own accounts have been rejected, mainly on account of vast amounts of fraud on the common agricultural policy, in, for instance, Italy, which is basically run by the mafia, or Poland likewise. The EU's own accounts have been rejected as totally worthless and bogus for 18 years on the trot. And these people still have the cheek to come to Britain, cap in hand, with a gun, saying, you give us this money or there's going to be terrible trouble. It's a scandalous rip-off, and when you consider that the Tory party took us in to Europe, the Labour Party have kept us in Europe, the Lib Dems have always wanted us deeper in Europe, all the parties of the Westminster establishment are to blame for ripping us off and giving us away our freedom, and that's why the British National Party is determined to get back our freedom, withdraw from the European Union, and keep that money to use it in our country for our people. Thank you. Okay, thank you. Next question.
I'd like to ask Mr. Griffin, do you think nationalism would be strengthened by all the splinter groups coming under one banner?
A nationalist unity question. Well, the truth is that the vast majority of the nationalists in Britain, the real nationalists, are already in the British National Party. And people look, just because every month a new little splinter group comes up and another one collapses, people get the impression that, oh, there's this terrible division, there's all these different groups. When you actually look at the membership figures, when you actually look coming up shortly for our turnover last year of hundreds of thousands of pounds, and their turnover of a couple of £1,000s each. The truth is there is only one nationalist party in Britain, and that's the British National Party. And these people, they sit there and they carp and complain. The latest one, for instance, it's run out of the northeast of England, and the two big fish in it are Kevin Scott, who has been in charge of a group called Civil Liberty for 8 or 9 years. Now, I gave £1,000 once to Civil Liberty because it was quite a good cause. He did some good work. But ever since it was formed, he's never published a set of accounts. No one knows where the money's gone. And a partner in this crime and this attack on nationalism up there is a chap called Ken Booth. And he's complained, oh, the British National Party's accounts a couple of years ago were rejected. And key reason for that is that he was in charge of the Newcastle branch. He was doing vast amounts of printing for people, lots of money turning around. He refused to account for it. He refused to submit his branch petty cash book, with the result that the auditors failed our accounts because they weren't a complete picture. And then, having made our accounts fail, he's got the sheer barefaced cheek to say, oh, the accounts have failed, and to point the finger at us. And now these people have set up this little rival party which is supposedly going to sweep us away. It's not. You're talking about a handful of people, 50 people at their first launch meeting at its height. By the end of the day, nearly half of those had left because it was so boring, so useless, and they're not doing anything. Don't want to be negative, but all they do is gripe and carp about us. Whereas the British National Party is out there with our paper, with our leaflets, campaigning on the streets, as you know, campaigning with things such as helping pensioners, helping young families, helping British ex-servicemen, all sorts of things. We're actually out there doing things. You'll have seen perhaps on the website the incredible story, if you didn't know how bad Britain was, of that poor old lady in Rotherham, where Marlene Guest, our candidate there, has done so much to help her. And we've now finally got the police to accept that when you've got a little old English lady who's having her windows bricked and her house daubed and attacked night after night after night by a gang of Muslim thugs who want her out of her house so that they can buy it at a dirt cheap rate, the police have now finally accepted they've got to take action. And that's the kind of things the British National Party does, actually going out there and doing things for our people. And if people want to sit and carp, let them sit and carp. My only message to the good people who are out there who've been sitting on the sidelines for a couple of years is, look, it's quite obvious the British National Party has won the battle to be on top within the nationalist movement in Britain by a mile. If you want to do something useful for Britain, get on board with the British National Party. That's the nationalist unity that we need. Okay, and another question.
Should e-cigarettes be regulated, as they could contain dangerous amounts of nicotine?
Well, that's not a question I've been asked before. E-cigarettes are these electronic cigarettes. They're cigarettes you don't set light to, and it's a way of for people who perhaps who smoke, but are somewhere where they can't smoke, such as on a plane or these days in a pub or whatever, where they can get their nicotine fix. Should they be regulated? Well, I think the danger of having these things regulated is what's going on here. The government, whichever one's in power, they get a huge amount of money from tax on tobacco, tax on smoking. And as I understand it, e-cigarettes, there's no tax on them. So it's becoming a way in which people who are a bit on the hard upside are increasingly getting their nicotine. In particular, it's moved from being something which was primarily there to help people quit smoking, is now being used increasingly, for instance, instead of having to leave the pub to have a cigarette because the government has murdered hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of traditional British pubs by bringing in a smoking ban, instead of leaving it up to the landlord, which is our policy. It's for the landlord to decide. A pub is often his home. It should be for the landlord to decide whether to allow smoking or not, and not for the state to come and interfere. But thank you. But that's that ban is one of the drivers of e-cigarettes. They're also, of course, used by people who actually want to quit smoking. If you bring it, there's a plus for regulation that at present they're being imported from all over the world, sold in all sorts of ways, on street markets and all sorts of things like that, and nobody actually knows what's in them. So what level of nicotine's in them? Is there any nicotine in at all? Is there too much? Is it dangerous? So there's an argument for regulating this, because the government in effect has forced people to move on to using these things, and yet it's unregulated. So from that point of view, I think regulation would be a good thing. On the other hand, the moment they start testing things and regulating things, then they've got their claws into a reason to tax it, and then that's again going to mean that people who've just found a way of going out to the pub and having a good time and doing what they want to do, instead of staying at home so the pubs die, they'll be forced away. And people who are trying to give up, and perhaps one of the reasons that people give up is because smoking is expensive. So at present there's an incentive to give up and use these things as you do, because while you're giving up, you're saving a lot of money. If the government taxes e-cigarettes to the hilt, as they will if they get a chance, then it's going to make it harder for people to give up. So we're in a catch-22, and I think for genuine health and safety's sake, they should be regulated, they should be controlled so that you get what you're buying. But the government needs to promise people right from the start that these things, because they save in the end, they'll save the health service vast amounts of money by making it easier for some people to get off cigarettes, which really are bad for you. I think the government needs to say, we recognise that these things are a social good and therefore we are not going to tax them. If those two things were done at the same time, then I think it'd be very, very good for the industry, it'd be good for the health of individuals, it'd be good for publicans, it would also be good for the NHS, taxpayers, be good for everybody. Thank you. If we can move on to a question slightly more familiar, I'd be very grateful.
What are your thoughts on the bedroom tax?
Oh, this is potentially, for this Tory government, what the poll tax was for the last Tory government, because it's so grotesquely unfair. It's hitting people who are on benefits with, as I'm sure you know as you asked the question, a tax on any bedroom in their house that isn't used. And the rules are that a child of, say, 2 has to share a room with a child of 10 or 11. And so instead of having a bedroom each, they've got to be put in one. And people are going to be taxed, in effect, on that spare bedroom, whether it's spare or not. So if you've got a divorced couple and there's a room which the kids perhaps only use at the weekend with one of the parents, it's going to be empty, it's going to be taxed. It's hugely unfair, especially as the tax is falling on people in receipt of housing benefit. And a very high proportion of people in receipt of housing benefit are in receipt of housing benefit because they're not working, because they're disabled. And it's a significant amount of money. With one spare bedroom, it's going to cost, in most places, around about £60 a month. And if you've got 2 spare bedrooms, that's going to cost £100 a month or more. Now, to a family, to people on low incomes already, that's a huge amount to be taking out of their benefits. And the government's made no bones about it. They say they know that's going to drive people out of their homes. And that's what they want, because they want to free up the big houses by shoving people into smaller houses so that the larger ones there are there for new tenants. And when I look, for instance, at what the government did, the last government down in Barking and Dagenham, where I was heavily involved a couple of years ago, where they were desperately angry about the fact that the vast majority of houses there were going to people who were related to existing tenants, which they said means that this is, in effect, social housing in Barking and Dagenham is for the white working class, and they're discriminating against people from ethnic minorities. And the Labour Party started to change that about 5 years ago, with the result that social housing has gone from being about 2% ethnic minority to 50% ethnic minority in all the new houses in the space of 5 years. So it's another attack on the white working class and on poor people, and it's designed specifically to force them out of the bigger houses. Who's going to get the bigger houses? I think we all know. The people with the large families and so on, whether they're ones who've been born here or the new wave of Roma Gypsy immigration, it's going to free it up for them. And it's so grotesquely unfair and unjust. And you imagine, people have been in a home for 20, 30, 40 years, they've got their friends, their neighbours, they're literally going to be forced out. They'll be mainly going into private rented accommodation, where there's no security of tenure, where the rents are much higher, so that's a loss. As I said before, a very high proportion of people who are on receipt of benefit and in social housing are disabled. That means that their houses very often have already been adapted for disabled, wheelchair access and such like. All those adaptations are going to be wasted. Complete waste of taxpayers' money, and they're going to be shunted into private rented accommodation which hasn't got any of those things, so they'll be less able to fend for themselves, less able to care for themselves. They'll either suffer, or the taxpayer's going to have to pay more to send in daycare and help and so on, all the rest of it. So it's going to cost us even more money. What happens to families who are in social housing accommodation with a bit of extra space? They've got a pet, cat or a dog or whatever. Many, many private landlords don't allow pets. Most of them don't, in fact. So what are they going to do? They can't let the animal just run riot on the street and just leave it. 1, because it's wrong, and 2, because the government's insisting from now on everything's chipped. They're going to have to put those animals down. Destroy their much-loved pets, just because This government and the Labour councils up and down the country like them want to force our people to relinquish homes they've lived in all their lives in many cases, so that there's more space for the others to have houses in the middle of our communities as a way of breaking up our communities. So it's absolutely wrong, it's got to be opposed, and I do think that with this, the Tory government, which has brought it in, and the Labour councils that enforce this law, instead of saying it's a bad law, we're simply going to reject it, I think in due course they will all of them pay the price at the ballot paper, and my God, they deserve to.
The local MP, Andrew Stevenson, Conservative, has handed a petition into Parliament. It was organised by mosques across Pendle. They want to ensure that blasphemy becomes illegal, especially regarding insults to the Prophet Muhammad. And me, a Pendle councillor, I'm opposed to this, having extreme Islamophobia. So many of the Muslim colony in this part of the northwest, they have a medieval mindset, and a lot of them haven't come to terms with the 17th century, never mind the 21st century. I was just wondering what your opinion was on this.
Indeed, it's an extraordinarily dangerous thing, what's going on here, and it really marks out the shame and the treachery of the Conservative Party. You've got a Conservative MP pushing this forward. They really should know better. There's a little thing in this country, freedom of speech. It's the foundation stone of our democracy. And the minute you have a law which is designed explicitly to stop people criticising aspects of Islam which are absolutely incompatible with our way of doing things, and you might think, or someone out there who's a bit naive might think, well, yeah, people shouldn't be allowed to insult their prophet. As a matter of fact, of course, they wouldn't use it about insults. Who on earth is going to bother to insult someone who's been dead for well over 1,000 years? What they want to use this for is to stop people criticising aspects of Islam which make it dangerous to people on the streets of this country now, young girls, women, young lads, and so on. And the only way you can do that, you can't talk, for instance, about grooming sensibly, we can't deal with the grooming problem without recognising the origins of the grooming problem. And the origins of the grooming problem are the Quran, which preaches contempt for women and hatred of unbelievers. And you have to get that across if you're going to discuss the issue. And likewise, Muslims, it's not that their prophet is someone long dead and gone and irrelevant. They regard Muhammad as the perfect man, which means that anything he did in his life is okay for Muslim men to do in this life. And since, for instance, Muhammad at one stage, having defeated a Jewish tribe in battle and executed their leader, and he took and raped that man's wife the same evening he'd had her husband murdered, that means that it's okay to take women from another community. In the Quran it says those who your right arm owns, slave women, those taken by force, and it's all right. And of course not all Muslims do it, and many Muslims see they don't read the Quran. Virtually no one reads the Quran in the original Arabic. They can't. It's like us trying to read the original Beowulf from the 7th century AD English. You simply can't do it. So many of them don't even know about it, but those who do, and the influence of it permeates really most of their community. There's a few sects which isn't true of, most of it permeates it, and it makes it a menace to us. And we had to be able to discuss this. So they're trying to use this proposed law, blasphemy law, to stop issues being talked about which are absolutely relevant and real, and a failure to address them means that people are going to be victimised and hurt in very, very shocking ways, now and in the future years. So it's wrong and it's very dangerous. Having said that, if we're going to have a blasphemy law in this country, and we used to have, they've been repealed, there's a case for saying, well, Christianity is the core of this country's identity, the core of our culture, the core of our traditions, and the foundation stone, even of freedom of speech and democracy. It all comes in the end from the Christian concept of free will. So if you're going to protect any religion with a blasphemy law, it should be the Christian religion. But again, even that, you're then touching on freedom of speech, and my feeling is that if people hold their own beliefs, whatever they may be, religious beliefs, that's fair and fine. and if they believe that if someone criticises those beliefs, they're going to burn in eternal hellfire, well, that should be punishment enough. And it shouldn't be for the state to interfere and start saying you can say this or you can't say that. So I think where we are now, where everyone theoretically has freedom of speech, but you can't incite violence against somebody else, you know, that's a clear abuse of freedom of speech. That's always been the law, that you can't do that. But overall, I think the law which says we have freedom of speech, that means you can say, providing you don't advocate violence, you can say anything you like. That should apply to all religions, but most definitely we have to be free to criticise the aspects of 7th century Islam which make it a danger to people in modern society, because only if there's that criticism is there the faintest possibility that that faith will be reformed in order to make itself compatible with the modern world. And that needs to be done, so we're absolutely opposed to that proposal, and thank you very much for drawing it to my attention.
Oh, well said.
Okay, so looking at the time, we've got time, I think, for one more question. Have one more, please.
What's the party opinion on Horsemeat, this scandal that's going on?
Well, obviously, it's something which is on everyone's lips. There's a number of people to blame here. First of all, when people initially started blaming the supermarkets, one level it's unfair because they probably didn't know what they were buying. They might have done. But on the other hand, it's the supermarkets. I know farmers, you've got farmers in the party and so on, who for years they've been nailed to the floor by supermarkets, given the absolute lowest price possible. And so are people making things for them, with the result that people are pushed. When you're actually losing money, you're on every batch you supply to, say, Tesco's, and they say, well, if you don't like it, go to hell. You can see where the temptation comes in for people to think, right, how can we do something to keep this business going? Because it's as bad as that. So to an extent, the supermarkets have brought it upon themselves. Our society, to an extent, has brought it on ourselves, because, for instance, when, in pursuit of various trendy ideas, they stopped teaching kids in schools how to cook a good basic meal with the ingredients you can buy at a local butcher's, simple, good food, traditional British food, and started teaching them airy-fairy things that involve already processed ingredients, then we've taken away from a whole young generation, basically, the ability to make their own food from scratch. So they're going to go and buy frozen lasagnas, because it's the only way they can have lasagna. So that's society's fault as a whole there. So that's a problem. But obviously, people who are adulterating our food deserve to be punished, whether it's with other meats or whether it's with sawdust or whether it's with chemical poisons. It's got to be stopped, and it's one of the things that you need an effective government, an effective state. We don't need the state to tell people that you can or cannot smoke in a pub, but you do need the state to intervene between greedy big business and the population to make sure that, for instance, we get what we think we're paying for. But there's one, and everyone is agreed on that, and certainly if you look at what the Labour Party, the Tory Party, the Lib Dems, all their spokesmen, and UKIP, they all say, oh yes, we've got to get grip on this, we've got to label this food, we've got to know where it all comes from. Do you know what? None of those people have allowed, they've all had the chance to vote for it. I've seen it in the European Parliament. They had the chance to vote for the labelling of halal meat. And all of them, Tory, Lib Dem and Labour, they voted against that. So they say, oh, we should know if we're eating horse. I want to know if I'm eating an animal which has been put into a crate, turned upside down alive, had its throat slashed unstunned, bled to death in agony for several minutes, because that's what halal and kosher slaughter involves. I want to know if I'm eating that meat, because I wouldn't damn well buy it, and nor would millions of other people. But these same people going on about horse meat and how terrible it is, and saying it's all got to be labelled, it's got to be traced, they won't let us know what is halal meat and what is not halal meat. There's a huge hypocrisy there, and UKIP are part of this as well, because in the European Parliament, although the vast majority of their voters would agree with us that halal meat is one of the symptoms of the Islamisation of this country, and it's got to be stopped, or at the very least, we should have a right to reject halal meat so that we're not unwittingly subsidising their butcheries and their way of doing things. UKIP abstained on that vote. They didn't have the courage to vote on what all their voters believe, which is that we, the British people, have a right, at the very least, to know what is halal or kosher slaughter. As a matter of fact, the British National Party would go beyond that and say, so we support the labelling of ritually slaughtered meat. That's a start. But as a matter of fact, if we were in power, we would ban it completely, because it's absolutely unacceptable. It's an appalling, brutal way of killing animals. It doesn't fit in with the traditions of this country, and we would not have any of it. So those people who have adulterated our food supplies one way or another, they should be taken to the cleaners on how to dry in order to teach other suppliers. They shouldn't do it again. But let's have some honesty in this and not complain about eating horse if we're forced to eat halal or kosher slaughter meat at the same time. Thank you for an interesting question. Thank you very much.